I can sit down now because they've done what I need to do. So goodbye, everybody. So I'm going to start this morning. We're going back into our series on Acts. For those of you that weren't here in the earlier part of the year, from about, did we start about Easter? Something like that. We started on the series in Acts. And we've been working our way through, not necessarily chronologically, and I'm skipping forward a little bit more, which will probably come back. I've missed out the stoning of Stephen, but I'm going to be talking about the conversion of Saul this morning. So over the summer period, we've had a break from this series, and so off we go again. So can we have the picture up first, please, Steph? So it is, yeah. a bit fuller in the face, I think. A bit more hair. I'll be probably surprised if many of you know who this man is from the picture. And please don't shout out if you do know, but you keep it to yourself. But to be fair, he looks pretty much like any other man from that kind of era. Mal probably knows who it is. Yes, she does. She's nodding. I thought she would. But he was born in 1725, which is almost 300 years ago now, isn't it? He was a bully, a blasphemer, and a militant atheist, a wild and angry young man. His mother died when he was only aged 7, and she was an early Christian influence on his life, but it kind of went astray after that. He was taken to sea by his father, who was the captain of a ship, at age 11. And then when he was 18 years old, he was back in England, he was visiting some friends, and he was press-ganged into the Royal Navy. So for those of you who don't know what press-ganged is, basically the Royal Navy, particularly at ports like Portsmouth, where it was the main hub of the Royal Navy, they would just go around the local streets and the bars, and they would just grab people that looked that they were about the right age to go and serve on the ships. And that's what happened. He was forcibly taken, put onto a ship, and to serve in the Royal Navy. He was caught trying to desert, and he disobeyed the rules so flagrantly that he was publicly flogged. He was hated and feared by all his crewmates as well, so he didn't get on with anybody, it seems. He ended up actually being enslaved himself in Sierra Leone, which is West Africa. West Clenham's gone. Okay. Thanks for that, Alex. Sure really appreciate that. So West Africa, but a little bit later on than that, he escaped and he became the captain of various slave ships. But it was when he was caught up in a severe storm off the west coast of Ireland that he prayed to God for mercy, his last hope, really. And it was that day, on the 10th of March, 1748, that marked his conversion. A meeting with God that turned his life completely around. So he worked tirelessly. Welcome back, Clenham. Everybody knows where you've been, apparently. So, he worked tirelessly alongside William Wilberforce to see the abolishment of the slave trade in this country. This man had such a powerful encounter with God that it changed not only him, but the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, not only in this country, but beyond. So if you haven't already worked it out, his name's John Newton, and he was best known as the writer of the hymn Amazing Grace. So great thanks to the young people this morning and some older ones for their telling of the story of the conversion of Saul and the miraculous encounter that he had with God. It's an encounter that over history has had an even more powerful effect on and continues to today through his writings of many letters in the New Testament. Am I a bit echoey? Is it? Okay, do you want me to turn it in a little bit? I don't know. I'll just have to live with it. Saul, or Paul, as he would later be known, changed completely, as we've already heard, from the chief persecutor of the early church to the most fervent apostle for the early church. Now, can we pull up the next slide, please? So I'm going to read Acts 9, verses 1 through to 19. You can follow it either up there or on your Bibles. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priests and asked for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, who you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called him in a vision. "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with the authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. So who was this man Saul? So it's thought he was born between AD 1 and 5 in Tarsus, which is now part of southern Turkey. I probably should have had a map, but I don't have a map. But if you go up Israel and through Lebanon and you just turn a left turn into Turkey, it was just along that first sort of edge as you get around the top edge of the Mediterranean there. He was a Benjamite of Hebrew ancestry. His parents were Pharisees, who were fervent Jewish nationalists who strictly followed the law of Moses. He spoke Greek, Latin, and Aramaic, which at that time was the official language of Judea. His family were also citizens of Rome. Now, aged 13, he went to study in Israel under the Rabbi Gamaliel, where he would have learnt Jewish history, the Psalms, and the works of the prophets. He later went on to become a lawyer. Now, it's likely that he was also a member of the Sanhedrin, and that was the Jewish Supreme Court of 71 men who ruled over Jewish life and religion. He was a zealous man, and he did not compromise. So Saul was present at the stoning of Stephen, which was a couple of chapters earlier, and I'm sure one of the guys is going to come on to that in due course. And he was ruthless in his pursuit of Christians. He believed them to be blasphemers, and he believed he was doing in the name of God. But it's interesting, actually, when you think about it, that even as Saul was wreaking havoc among the early church, he was arresting, imprisoning, overseeing beatings, and also, in Stephen's case, murder. He was breaking up the church and doing his best to bring this movement to an end. But in actual fact, he was already being used by God. Inadvertently, he was helping the church to outwork the Great Commission. So in persecuting the early church, he was actually spreading the believers over an ever-increasing part of that area of the Middle East. So as those believers were scattered, they took with them the gospel into the areas that they then found themselves in. So it's the same story actually today, isn't it? Those places around the world where persecution of Christians and the church is the greatest is often where the church is growing the most. Apparently there's now 60 million Christians in China. Now that sounds a lot, there's a lot of people in China, but still that's almost as many people as in this country. That is a large amount. Iran has the largest concentration of Christians in any country in the Arab world. Iran's very closed off. The persecution in these countries is actually very similar to what we read about in this account of Saul. Now we hear many horrific stories, don't we, of persecution of Christians around the world. The terrible sufferings endured, the pain and heartache of families torn apart, people who just vanish. Now it's thought that over 100,000 Christians a year lose their lives because of their faith, which is a sobering thought. So we're so fortunate, aren't we, to live in a society that has the freedoms that we have. However, with that often comes complacency, self-reliance, and a trust in anything, but particularly a trust in material things. And it breeds an attitude of, do I really need God? Those Christians that Saul was persecuting and those who face persecution in the world today have a complete reliance on God. Now I'm going to leave you with a question because I want to move the story on and it wasn't really my main point, but if you've got anything to write with or make a note, just write it down. And it's so those that face persecution have a complete reliance on God. The question would be, in what or who is your reliance or my reliance? Is it in the world and what it has to offer? Comfort, finances, material things, work, family, etc. Or is it solely on God? I think that's a challenge for us all, really, to come back to time and time again, because it's easy, isn't it, to put our hope and our reliance in other things. So the next part I want to look at is God's call of Saul. Now, Saul was very familiar with the books of what we now call the Old Testament, and there's several examples of God speaking to people throughout the Old Testament, be it Adam, Noah, Moses, Job, Jacob, David, Elijah, Jonah, Hosea, and lots of others. And some of those God actually spoke to in an audible voice. So, although it no doubt came as a massive shock to Saul that God was speaking to him, he knew that it was actually possible. So Saul answers, "Who are you, Lord?" Now the answer he got would have been actually a massive surprise, wouldn't it? Because he would have probably been thinking something along the lines of, I am the Lord your God, the God of Abraham, Moses, and the prophets. But the answer he got was much more than that, wasn't it? The voice said, I am Jesus, who you are persecuting. I can only imagine the light bulb moment. Now, those of you that have already know Jesus have probably had a similar light bulb moment. And I think about other light bulb moments that I might have had in my life or you might have had in your life. And particularly those of you that are teachers or have been teachers, and you tell kids this and you keep coming back to it all about how things work and this, that, and the other. And I think of algebra as a great example of can't get. You keep telling me, but I can't get it. And say those of you teachers will keep plugging the same things, and you'll have kids that just can't get it. And suddenly, for no apparent reason, bang, they understand. And that was really what happened with Saul at that time. It was like, whoa. and the implications of that would have been huge on him at that time. So he was really well versed in the scriptures, and he would have known all the promises about the coming Messiah, and it all played out in front of him, and Jesus had fulfilled all those prophecies, but he didn't see it. And it should have been plain to see, really, because he knew those scriptures well, and he could have seen that Jesus fulfilled all those, but he didn't. Because Saul was completely blind to the fact that Jesus' followers that he was trying to silence were actually telling the truth all along. And Jesus spoke to him, I am Jesus who you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and I will tell you what to do. So obediently, he gets up, as we saw quite slowly in this case. It says he actually got up straight away and realizes that he can't see at that stage. So why did God cause him to go blind? Well, the Bible actually doesn't say, but we can make some assumptions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to make some assumptions here. We can only assume really that Jesus wanted to continue to speak into and shape Saul's heart. He was a proud man, and he was used to doing things his way, keeping to the law and traditions and seeking to ensure by force that others did likewise. If Saul was to preach the power of Jesus, what better way to do it than to experience it firsthand? Having completely been overwhelmed by his presence, his glory, and he needed to surrender himself to God before him, and come before him to supply his every need. He had to be freed from his old ways of seeing God, so that when his sight was restored, he could see God for who he really is. So for Saul to truly understand who Jesus was, he needed to have the eyes of his heart opened. So that's something that would have been probably much harder without that period of physical blindness. In opening Saul's heart, opening the eyes of his heart, Saul was able to completely and experience really the fullness of God's love, his joy, his hope, which we heard about earlier, peace, grace, and blessing. For 3 days, Saul would have been overwhelmed by these. His whole life and his existence, his learning, everything was completely turned on its head. So do you ever feel that you're not good enough for God? You might have been told that, how can you call yourself a Christian? You've done X, Y, or Z, or X, Y, and Z even. Or you've said to yourself, I could never be a Christian because I've done all these terrible things. So, if you ever feel like that, then take a look at Saul. God's grace was sufficient for him, the most awful of people, God chose him to be the one that took the gospel right out across the whole of the Roman world. Paul, as he would later be known, had a complete understanding of what it meant to be saved by grace, because he had received so much. Likewise, God's grace is always sufficient for us, no matter who or what we have been or done. So meanwhile, God was speaking to another man. We've moved on in the story, and this time it wasn't in an audible voice like we heard from the back of the room. It was actually in a vision. God can speak and does so in many ways which are documented throughout the Bible, and there's many ways that he speaks to us today. Not many, I don't suppose, have heard the audible voice of God. However, God does speak to us through visions, dreams, feelings, nature, music, answers to prayers, the counsel of others, circumstances, the Bible very often, but also other people speaking directly into difficult situations and things that we've got going on in our lives, and many more besides that. God spoke to Ananias and told him to go lay hands on Saul so he'd receive his sight. I would imagine for Ananias the thought of going to Saul, a man who he knew was responsible for beatings, imprisonment, and execution of some of his fellow Christians, would have been a pretty terrifying prospect. And you can't blame him for double-checking if it was really God speaking to him. Verses 13 and 14 go on. Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. He has come here with the authority of the chief priest to arrest all who call on his name. I'm sure he went off with great trepidation, not really knowing what might befall him. He did, though, trust God, and God did tell him that Saul was his chosen instrument to proclaim his name to the Gentiles, their kings, and the people of Israel. Ananias' obedience in the face of much fear is incredibly brave, and it could only have been achieved because that he had complete faith in Jesus, knowing that whatever might befall him, he was secure in Jesus' hands. So, I'm going to handle this very carefully. Has anybody got a real fear of spiders? I need somebody to put the hand up here. Yvonne apparently has a real fear of spiders. Okay. So, Yvonne, if I said I've got lots of spiders in here, how's that making you feel? So, if I was to ask you to come up here and hold this box of spiders, would you be quite fearful and apprehensive? So this is it's a silly example really, but if I was to ask you to come up here and I was to keep hold of the box of spiders, that would make you feel a bit better about coming and doing what I might ask you to do, mightn't it? And likewise, Jesus does that. He prepares the way for us. So although he might ask us to do things that we feel a little bit apprehensive about, and we might be fearful and we might have anxiety, he goes with us and he's already prepared that way. So Ananias goes off to the house where Saul was staying, and he enters. Verses 17 to 19, I'm not going to read it, you can follow it up on the screen because I'm probably running out of time. Those scales fell off Saul's eyes would have been metaphorically like the ones that had been falling off his heart after meeting Jesus. Not only had he regained his sight, but now he has a complete understanding of who Jesus really was. John Newton in the lyrics of Amazing Grace puts it, I was once lost, but now I am found. I was blind, but now I see. And that's not a physical blindness, that's a spiritual blindness. So one that we can all have the chance to be freed from. Now, for those that know you well, know me, know that I'm a practical kind of person and that I consider theory as a guide to practical application. So if I was to just talk this morning and leave it there, you might possibly be left with an increase of knowledge, maybe not, but maybe nothing more. Now to me, that will be a little wasted if there's no application for us to put practically what you learn. So if there's one main point I want to pull out of this passage, then it's what do we do when God speaks to us? I covered earlier about some of the ways that God speaks to us. Now, for some this morning, you may not have heard God speak to you before, and you're unsure who he is. It could be that you woke up this morning feeling that I need to go to church, but I'm not sure why. Maybe you've seen something special in a friend or a colleague, but can't explain what that is. Maybe it's a fresh look at nature and creation around you. Now, to those people, you've got a choice. You could, like Saul, say, "Who are you, Lord?" and ask him to show you who he is. You could ignore him and carry on just the way you are. I would ask, though, why choose to stay as you are when, like Saul, your life could be transformed? And it's even greater transformation than receiving sight when physically blind. John Newton said, I was blind, but now I see. And that was receiving spiritual sight. That encounter and change of heart, the freedom, the peace, the grace, the love, the joy, the hope, that meaning that Jesus brings when he blasts through that spiritual darkness and brings all those things to your life is truly amazing. So even if you don't feel you've heard him speak before, you have come here this morning, you're listening to me speak, and I would encourage you to say, Lord, I'm listening, speak to me now. And maybe you relate more to Ananias. You know who Jesus is. The eyes of your heart have been opened to him, and you experience all those love, grace, freedom, joy, peace, etc. But do you recognize his voice when he speaks to you? Possibly he's spoken very clearly to you, like Ananias, but you're afraid of what that might entail. For many of us, being open about our faith can take some courage. Speaking to work colleagues about Jesus can be right out of our comfort zone and can bring much fear and anxiety, like coming up and getting a hold of a box of spiders. And for most of us, being open about who Jesus is in our daily lives is what Jesus is calling us to do. Now, Afghanistan is the worst country in the world for persecuting Christians, closely followed by North Korea. In those countries, death is a very real prospect for anyone professing faith in Jesus, much like it was in this passage in Acts. And it's unlikely, very unlikely, it might happen, but very unlikely that God's calling you at this moment to go and speak to the head of the Taliban or to go and speak to Kim Jong-un about Jesus and the way that they're persecuting him. And that's the kind of level that Ananias was asked to go and do. Ananias knew that if Jesus was calling him to go to Saul, then Jesus would be going with him. He wasn't going alone. Not only that, but Jesus would have prepared the way in front of him. So the same applies to us today. If Jesus speaks to us and asks us clearly to go into a situation or speak to someone about him, we can be nervous, apprehensive, and downright scared about it, but we can go and be confident that God has called us to something that, although we find challenging, He is going to go with us, and He will give us the words to say, the things to do, and not only that, but He has prepared the way in front of us. He'll already have been working in that person's heart or situation. Romans 8, verse 31 says, What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, then who can be against us? We have that assurance. And further on in that chapter, in 37 to 39, it says, nothing can separate us from the love of God. You know, you may think God is speaking to you, but you're just not sure it's him, and there's nothing wrong actually with praying for clarity. If what you're hearing really is from God, first, it will be in line with what it says in Scripture. God will never speak to you about something that doesn't fit with what's written in his word. Second, talk to someone you trust and is known to hear clearly from God. And lastly, and most importantly, ask God for clarity. If it's from him, it'll become evident directly or indirectly through someone else, the Bible, circumstances, feeling peace around it. So we're going to go back into worship in a moment for one last song. And there are three areas that I'd like to give you opportunity to receive prayer into. Firstly, you hear the call of God like Saul for the first time, and you've never met Jesus before, and you want to answer, who are you, Jesus? Second, you've heard God speak to you but are afraid of what that might mean. The fear, the anxiety are preventing you really from stepping out into what he wants. Thirdly, you desire to hear God speak to you more in your life. So we're going to sing where we first started, and that's John Newton's famous song of his first encounter with Jesus and the effect it had on him. But before that, I've actually got a word that God's given me, which I don't know the context of, and it's one single word actually, but if it is for somebody here, they will know themselves what that is and the circumstance that is, and that's the word stop. Okay? Now, as I say, that I have no idea what that means, but I'm sure if that's from God that it will land on someone and they will know exactly what that is, and I'm very happy to pray with you without knowing any of the circumstances behind it. Or any of the guys, Ed, David, do so. But yes, if you want to hear, if you've heard God speak to you and you want to reply, who are you, Lord? I'd encourage you as well to whoever you've come with to say, yes, I want to know more. They're very happy to speak to you, pray with you. Fear and anxiety crippling you, really happy to pray with you again for that. And the third one was you desire to hear more of God in your life. So as we move on, either gather together and pray with one another, or welcome to come out and speak to one of us and we'll pray with you. Steve.